I got an email from Dave a few months ago asking me if I'd be willing to speak. And my initial response to Dave was, "Are you sure you have the right Tom?" Dave's still too embarrassed to admit his mistake, so here I am. So we're going to be talking to you about growth through acquisition. First, I'd kind of like to give you a brief introduction to our company and our family. My great-grandfather was Mott Elder. Mott got a job working for John Deere Company back in 1904. John Deere sent him to Argentina to sell farm equipment, and that's where he spent his working life. He had one son, Fred Elder. Fred was born and raised in Argentina. When Fred turned 18, his parents sent him back to the U.S. to get a college degree. He graduated from Kansas State in 1929 and got hired on by John Deere Company, and John Deere sent him to Phoenix to sell farm equipment, which he did until 1947 when he started our company, John Deere dealership based in the Phoenix area. Fred ran the business until he passed away in 1973. My dad, Ferenc, took over in 1975. I joined the company straight out of college in 87. My younger brother, Rob, joined after a brief law career in 1994. That's the three of us. Today, we're joined by my youngest brother, Teddy, and I have two boys in the business, Ryan and Joey. My dad passed away last year. So that's us. So one of the 7 Ps of Evergreen companies is paced growth. I've got some options up here for how you can grow the business: organically, trying new things, or growing through acquisitions. We tried to grow organically, but as a John Deere dealership in the 70s and 80s, we had pretty much a defined territory. Once you achieve a certain level of market share, there's not really much opportunity to grow organically anymore. Acquisitions weren't a possibility in the 70s and 80s, as John Deere preferred to have small mom-and-pop dealerships. So my dad grew the business by investing in new things, new ventures. So we built a dairy, as Dave mentioned, and he invested in the local real estate market. In the late 90s, Deere's perspective on size of dealerships started to change, and we got the opportunity to start growing through acquisitions. So a couple years ago, Harvard Business Review did an article on growth through acquisitions. I pulled this quote: typically 70 to 90% of acquisitions are abysmal failures, not just mediocre failures, but abysmal failures. The good news for us was this article was published in 2016 and not 1996. If it had been 1996, we might have chosen a different path. So back in the mid-90s, this is what our company looked like, what it had looked like for the vast majority of its history. We were a 3-store John Deere dealership centered in Phoenix. In the mid-90s, before we started to grow, I saw a speaker talk about doing acquisitions. I very clearly remember the main message of his talk, which was when you acquire a new business, you need to change the leadership and everything else in the first 100 days. When I heard that, I thought, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. When you acquire a business, doesn't the existing leadership have to have some positive qualities? Doesn't the business have to be doing some things well that you can learn from? It just seems way too harsh to me. Well, so this is what our company looks like today. We have 25 stores in 8 western states. We've grown like this through a series of 15 acquisitions in the last 20 years. The very first one was acquiring a small dealership in the San Diego area, the Escondido dot on the map. Our most recent acquisition was about a year and a half ago. We acquired 3 stores up here in the Snake River Plain of Idaho, Twin Falls, Burley, and American Falls. The first acquisition in Escondido, we acquired a store that had 8 employees and did about $1 million in revenue. The most recent acquisition was about 80 employees and about $100 million in revenue. In the 20 years of this growth, we've gone from $30 million in revenue in 1997 to $375 million in revenue last year. As I go through the talk, I'll kind of compare and contrast for you how the first one went compared to how the last one went and kind of what we've learned along the way. So there's a number of keys to success when you're going to go through an acquisition. Obviously, you have to be able to make a deal, and you have to be able to finance a deal. I'm not going to spend any time talking about those. If you haven't done one, those might seem like daunting challenges. But the truth is, acquisitions don't fail because you can't make a deal. Acquisitions fail because you make a deal and then you can't execute and integrate the new business. So we'll spend time today talking about how to actually make it work once you've made a deal. And I'll focus on culture, people, processes, and communication. If you think about our businesses in general, if you feel like your business is running well, sometimes you might say things are running like a well-oiled machine. And that well-oiled machine analogy really is what you're saying is that there's no friction in the system. Everything's working like it's supposed to. Everything is running smoothly. When you do an acquisition, you are going to introduce a significant amount of friction into the system. And that's, I think, why most fail, is because it's just too much friction for the system to handle. If you focus on these 4 things, you can do your best to minimize the friction. You can't eliminate it. And as you minimize the friction, you increase your chances of success. So, culture. What's important about culture when you're doing an acquisition? The culture itself, I don't think really matters. I would suggest that we probably have as many different cultures represented in the room today as we have businesses. And there's nothing wrong with any of your cultures, and there's nothing wrong with my culture. What's important about your culture is that it's defined. And by defined, I mean written down. And that it's transferable. And transferable means that it's easy to teach. And known means that your existing team knows it, that the players on your existing team can teach it to the players on the new team that you're acquiring. So, as an example, if your culture is defined, but it's defined in lots of paragraphs of buzzwords and takes up a couple pages, that's not going to be teachable or transferable. If your culture is simple and defined, but nobody knows what it is, it's not going to transfer to the new acquired locations. So I'd like to give you kind of a brief introduction to our culture, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about: simple, defined, and transferable. We have 5 core values: quality, integrity, loyalty, caring, and community. Our vision is to be the best equipment dealer in the world. We have this thing we call our circle of success, which is basically a simple picture of how we think our business works. In our case, the circle starts with people. If you want to be best in the world at something, you got to have great people on the team. Those people need processes or systems for how we go about doing business. Great people and great processes will drive happy customers. Happy customers will spend money with us, which lets us make money. And then when we make money, we have money to reinvest in the business and grow. Either grow by gaining market share, picking up more customers in our territory, or grow by picking up more territory and going after those new customers. Either way the business grows, the circle comes right back around to people, because as you grow, you need more people. As you're doing more things, the quality of the people becomes more important because they're juggling more things. So really that circle just keeps going around and around. Communication acts like the hub of the wheel for us. If we communicate effectively, everything works like it's supposed to, and we just keep getting better and better. And if you don't communicate effectively, then it's pretty easy to screw everything up. The last bit of our philosophy is what we call Stotz Equipment Difference. It's how we present ourselves to our customers. Basically, Mr. Customer, we're here to make your life easier. We're going to do it 3 ways: long-term relationships, flexible solutions, and uptime availability. And that's basically how we brand ourselves. So how do we make this culture known by everybody? Well, one of the simple things we do is every time we have a meeting in the company, we start off with a culture review. We ask, what are our core values? We ask, what's our vision? And we ask, what makes us different? And then we ask, tell me a story about something that happened here recently that shows us living up to our core values. Tell me a story about something that happened here recently that shows us making life easier for a customer. But talking about it and telling stories about it makes it real. And so I would expect that if you walked into one of our stores and you asked someone on the parts counter or the receptionist, tell me about the Stotz Equipment culture, I would expect them to be able to tell you. We have these 5 core values. Our vision is to be the best equipment dealer in the world, etc. It's really a part of who we are. So let's talk about people. What's important about people in an acquisition? Well, number 1 is leadership. So in our 15 acquisitions, we have tried leaving existing leadership in place. We have tried bringing in leadership from outside the company. And we have tried taking existing Stotz Equipment people and putting them into the leadership role in the new location. I can tell you from my experience, my personal experience, the first 2 don't work. Existing leadership doesn't work. New leadership from outside doesn't work. It only works when you bring in leaders from your own company. I think there's a couple reasons for that. I think number 1, when you are trying to lead change in a new organization, so you're trying to lead change in an acquired location to integrate them with the acquiring business, if you are new to the acquiring business, then you are learning the change. At the same time, your employees are learning the change. It makes it really difficult to lead the change. I heard someone recently say the pack moves at the pace of the leader. Well, if the leader is learning, then the leader's not moving very fast and the pack's not moving very fast. The other challenge with leadership is, from my perspective, if I'm managing the newly acquired business and I don't know the person running the store, and I don't know the players in the store, then when there's controversy or challenge or hurdles that need to be overcome, I don't know how to interpret what people are telling me because I don't know the players. If I know the players, or I know at least one or two players, it makes it much easier for me to understand what's happening. So it's critical to put your leadership in place. In our first acquisition, we left existing management in place. If I jump back to our culture, we did not have a defined culture with that first acquisition. Our culture was largely based on the force of my dad's personality. My dad didn't wind up spending any time in the new San Diego store, so there was no culture transfer. We couldn't transfer culture because we didn't have a defined enough culture to be able to explain it to other people. The leadership, we left existing leadership in place. The challenge with leaving existing leadership in place was he just kept running the business the way he used to run the business. We thought travel was an expense, so we didn't travel over there to oversee things. We thought that it was a John Deere dealership, just like we were a John Deere dealership, and John Deere dealerships are all the same, aren't they? We just do things all the same. Well, it turns out we're just as different as every other business is. So nothing changed in the new store in Escondido. Harvard Business Review would have categorized it as very clearly an abysmal failure as far as an acquisition. The most recent acquisition, obviously today we have a very clearly defined culture. Our team knows the culture. We swamped the new locations with existing employees. We had over 50 employees from our existing business involved in those 3 stores for a month. So there's a lot of peer-to-peer communication. It's one thing when the CEO stands up and tells you this is who we are. It's a totally different thing when the service technician or parts person says, no, really, this is who we are. So if you're going to be putting your own people in charge in a new location, you have to have some sort of leadership development program so that you have people prepared. You have the bench strength to be able to handle shifting people from your business into the new business. That becomes critical. How you integrate is also critical. One thing you need to understand when you acquire a business is that the employees there are going to be scared out of their minds. They're going to be scared for their jobs. They're going to be scared about all the change that's coming. They're going to view you as an invading, conquering army, and that they have been conquered. And as a result, they're going to view you as arrogant to add to their fear. So how you integrate, bringing your people together with their people, building relationships, makes a big difference. Talking about how you're going to treat them, putting them at ease as soon as possible, simplifies things. Anything you can do to put people at ease in a newly acquired location is going to reduce the friction. Every time they feel scared or view you as arrogant, it just increases friction in the system. In that most recent acquisition, 5 out of 9 key leadership roles in those 3 stores are now populated by Stotz equipment people. The culture changed within a couple months because we had swamped them with people. We got feedback from customers within a couple months that they were amazed at how differently they were being treated by the new business, even though they were dealing with the exact same people they dealt with before. And that was all a result of the culture change. Processes. Key thing about processes is very similar to culture. Your processes have to be well-defined and transferable. So again, it's teachable. Do you know your processes well enough to teach them to others? That's basically the criteria. Once you have taught them, just because you spend a month with a new location teaching them how to do business the way you want to do it, does not mean that they're going to continue doing that way forever. In fact, the odds are they won't. So we've come up with an audit process. Today we call it our success checklists, but audit's actually a fair way of describing it. And basically we will come in and check every few months how the processes are working to make sure everything is working the way we want it. And then finally, the integration process itself is kind of interesting. One thing we have done well between that first acquisition and our 15th acquisition is we started putting together integration checklists of all the different things we need to do as part of the process. And after the first 100 days of each acquisition, everybody involved in the acquisition process gets together and we do a big debrief and we improve our integration checklist. So today we have an integration checklist that has about 300 line items on a spreadsheet, and it's the end result of 15 times doing it and learning from our mistakes and trying to get better the next time. If I go back to that very first acquisition, We, again, assumed that they were a John Deere dealership, so they did business the same way we did. We didn't actually try to teach them our processes. Our processes, we probably wouldn't have known how to teach them that anyway, because what we were doing was just the result of years and years of doing it the same way. It wasn't written down or documented. And again, that was a terrible failure. We had, in the most recent acquisition, those stores were getting outstanding scores on our audits within the first 12 months, which is a good indication that we had the processes figured out. So the last bullet point is communication. Communication is the hub of the wheel in our circle of success. Again, keep in mind how those employees are going to feel and what they're going to be thinking when you start. So setting the tone early is really important. We spend some time, the very first time I talk to a new group of employees, we tell them the history of our company and our story. It helps them understand that we are a family business, not a big corporation, which is how we're perceived if we don't do that. We put them at ease about the pay, put them at ease about their jobs, do everything we can to make them feel comfortable. Building trust is critical. If we're going to try to reduce friction in the system, we have to build trust as quickly as possible. The only way I know how to build trust is transparent communication. So we're going to tell them we tell them as early as possible that the deal is happening. We tell them as early as possible what we're going to expect, how we think about the business, what we're going to expect of them, what they can expect of us. And finally, I mentioned earlier, peer-to-peer communication. It just is a world of difference for a service technician to hear from a service technician in the existing business how things work than it is for him to hear from me how things work. So to the extent that we can have our own people involved, it just makes things go much smoother. I think I mentioned we had over 50 people from the existing business involved in acquiring the last 3 stores, and they spent a month in those stores building relationships, getting to know people, and talking about how we do things. If I go back to those example acquisitions, I didn't know any of this stuff the first time, so we didn't do anything about it, about setting the tone or communicating or setting expectations. Again, we thought that their business was just like ours, and we didn't need to do that. This most recent deal, we announced our deal more than 60 days before we closed, which gives everybody a long time to get used to the idea. At the very first meeting, telling them the family history. At the very first meeting, telling them not to worry about their jobs, telling them we're going to do everything we can to make sure their pay and benefits comes out as good or better than it was before, and then getting them connected with our existing people as fast as possible. So kind of summarize the learning journey that I've been on over the last 20 years of doing these acquisitions. The key to success is trying to minimize friction. Friction jumps out and grabs you when you least expect it. And when you do an acquisition, you are creating a ton of friction. I sometimes liken buying stores to having children. You have a nice, happy marriage, and then you decide to have a kid. And when you first have that kid, boy, there's a lot of friction that comes into the system. But you get used to having that kid, and things kind of smooth out. And then sometimes you decide to have another kid, and you get a lot more friction, and it takes a little while to get used to it. Well, it's kind of the same way with acquiring stores. But if you focus on culture, people, processes, and communication, your chances of shrinking and reducing the friction are greatly increased. Your chances of being in the top 10% of acquirers and having a successful acquisition are much greater. And I guess I could summarize my whole presentation by hearkening back 20 plus years ago to that presenter I saw talk about acquisitions. And when he said, when you do an acquisition, change the leadership and everything else in the first 100 days. And I thought that was the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I would now tell you that that was a very wise man.